Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have this hearing. Thanks for calling it. Thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. Professor Shaw, nice to see you again. Let me just start with you, if I could, Professor Shaw. You talked about the fact that there have been lots of rulings against the Trump administration. That's absolutely statistically true. I disagree with almost all of them. In fact, I think all of them. But the issue of this hearing really isn't the rulings, is it? It's the remedies. Would you agree? And those are distinct things. You may think that the ruling is quite correct, but that's actually not what we're talking about here today. We could have a hearing on that. Maybe we should. But we're talking today about the remedy. And the question is a remedy that binds parties who are not before the court, is that an appropriate thing? I mean, aren't you concerned about judges binding non-parties in their remedies? You may love the ruling, but even if you do, don't you think it's a little bit anomalous for courts to be going out there and binding parties who are not before them? I mean, is that something we want to encourage?
Welcome back to American Stronghold, the place where we stand up for the Constitution, for American freedom, and for the truth the mainstream media refuses to tell you. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a breakdown of the radical left's hypocrisy and attacks on the principles that make this country great. Today, we're looking at a Senate hearing where Senator Josh Hawley absolutely exposed the double standards and partisan games being played around nationwide injunctions. What we saw here is exactly why so many Americans have lost faith in our judicial system, because it's become a political tool used to attack conservative administrations and protect left-wing agendas.
Senator, I think that judges have been issuing rulings that impact non-parties since Marbury versus Madison, right?
So you're not concerned about it?
I'm not. I absolutely think that they can be abused, and they have been abused.
Wait a minute. You were very concerned about it just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You said in response to a nationwide injunction on the Biden FDA's mifepristone rules, and I quote, "This injunction's a travesty for principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law."
I think I've been consistent today. That was issued by Judge Kaczmarek in a single judge division. They're a problem. Those are a problem.
With him personally? Wait.
No.
So your testimony is if it's issued by Judge Kaczmarek, it's bad?
No, sir.
It's personal?
That is not my testimony.
Is the problem with the injunction? You were criticizing the universal injunction
issued by a judge in a single judge division. I've been very clear today that those are a problem.
By a Republican judge in a Republican division, then it's bad.
No, Senator.
Otherwise, it's fine.
No, Senator. I think that single judge divisions
What is the
are a problem.
principal difference? I'm looking for a principle. I understand you hate the president. I understand you love all of these rulings against him. You and I both know that's not a principle. You're a lawyer. What's the principle that divides when issuing a nationwide injunction is okay when it's not? When the Biden administration was subject to nationwide injunctions, you said that they were travesties for the principle of democracy. You didn't say the referral to Judge Kaczmarek was a travesty. You said his injunction was a travesty for principles of democracy. Yeah. So, in other words, the translation is just you didn't like the outcome. Is that right?
No, Senator. Look, we're talking about, I don't think Article 3 precludes this form of relief. So we are talking about prudential considerations.
Prudential meaning political?
No.
Then give me, so far I have yet to hear it. You've been questioned by multiple senators. I have yet to hear a principle other than the fact when you like the ruling, you think it's great to apply it nationally, including non-parties. When you don't like the ruling, it is a travesty for the principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law.
Look, Senator, I'll say I think I am self-aware enough to know that my view of the underlying legal question, I am sure colors my perception of the remedy. I think that we should all acknowledge that. And yet I do think
and why shouldn't we stop nationwide injunctions for everybody?
I think that's
what we're talking about today.
Because I'm not willing to leave without relief non-parties who are injured.
No, you're not willing to leave without the ability to bind President Trump.
No, I
right?
think that...
I mean, when it's Biden, it's okay. No. When it's Biden, oh, it's a travesty. When it's Trump in office, it's, oh, no holds barred, whatever it takes, right?
I believe in a powerful...
What was it that President Biden's staff said? We've got to do undemocratic, unconstitutional things to save democracy. Why is this the same
I believe
thing?
In a powerful president. I do believe in presidential power, but power and constraint are not at fundamental odds.
What is the principle?
Power.
What is the principle? The legal principle. You've referenced prudence. You've referenced the judges you don't like. What's the principle of when an injunction binding non-parties, which was never done in this country before the 1960s? And let's see the chart, the Trump chart, which was done really only once Trump came into office for the first time. You don't think this is a little bit anomalous? You don't think that's a little bit strange?
A very plausible explanation, Senator, you have to consider is that he is engaged in much more lawless activity than other presidents, right?
You don't think
you must
this
concede that is a
was never
possibility.
used before the 1960s, and suddenly Democrat judges decide we love the nationwide injunction, and then when Biden comes to office, no, actually.
It's Republican appointees as well, Senator. And the 1960s is where some scholars sort of locate the beginning
Can
of
you
this,
identify
but
one
others.
before then?
Mila Sahoni, who's another scholar of universal injunction, suggests 1913 is actually the first. There were others in the 20s.
The Republic endured for 150 years before there was a nationwide injunction.
Well, the federal government was doing a lot less until 100 years ago. So there's many things that have changed in the last 100 or the last 50 years.
So long as it is a Democrat president in office, then we should have no nationwide injunctions. If it's a Republican president, then this is absolutely fine, warranted, and called for. How can our system of law survive on those principles, Professor?
I think a system in which there are no meaningful constraints on the president is a very dangerous system of law.
That's not what you thought when Joe Biden. That is not what you thought when Joe Biden was
every president
You
is
said that is
constrained
not what
and
you
must
said.
be.
You said it was
Absolutely.
a travesty for the principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law. You also said
Supreme
when
Court
Joe
senator
Biden
agreed,
was president. Wait a minute.
agreed 9-0 with me on
you
that
also
case,
said
to
when
be
Joe
clear.
Biden was president, you said the idea that anyone would foreign shop to get a judge who would issue a nationwide injunction was just politicians, just judges looking like politicians in robes. Again, it threatened the underlying legal system. People were just trying to get the result they wanted. It was a travesty for the rule of law. But you're fine with all of that if it's getting the result that you want.
Sir, the Supreme Court agreed unanimously with me in that case, right? There was no standing. The case should never have been allowed to proceed. And the combination of parties without standing and the single-judge division.
No. We're talking. No, they did not. They did not issue a ruling on the nationwide injunction. You criticized the injunction nationwide. Listen,
issued in a case where no one had standing.
Here's the thing. We've now gone 6 minutes, and Senator Kennedy had you for 6 or 7. You couldn't identify a single principled basis. We all know the truth here, which is it's not just you. It's most of my colleagues over here on this side of the aisle, who I respect a great deal, and they were raising very principled objections to the nationwide injunction just 6 months ago, maybe 9 now. And you're probably right. My point is that all that's changed in 9 months is the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I realize that my colleagues on this side of the aisle very much dislike that individual, and I realize that you think that the rulings that he has lost are fundamentally sound. We might grant all of that. I disagree with all of that, but we can put that to one side. The question we're talking about here is, should judges, single judges, district court judges, be able to bind non-parties who are not in front of them? And you used to say no, now you say yes. Let's be consistent. I would just suggest to you our system of government cannot survive if it's going to be politics all the way down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I briefly respond?
Sure.
I mean, you invoked democracy a couple of times there, Senator. Judges are part of our system of democracy. Democracy is not as simple as majority rule. Judges have always served something of a
You would have it be as simple as
function.
majority rule. When you get the majority you like, you're for the nationwide injunction. When you don't, you're not.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give you the opportunity.
Senator Hawley brought up the real issue, remedies. Not whether you agree with the ruling itself, but whether it's appropriate for a judge, often a single district court judge, to issue a nationwide injunction that binds people and entities who aren't even party to the case. This is something that never really happened in America before the 1960s. And guess what happened when Trump came into office? Suddenly, nationwide injunctions were flying left and right from liberal judges who wanted to halt his agenda at every turn. But when the shoe was on the other foot, when Biden faced a nationwide injunction blocking one of his policies, suddenly the same people who cheered on these judicial power grabs were outraged, calling it a travesty for democracy. Senator Hawley pressed Professor Shaw on this exact point, reading back his own words. Just a couple of years ago, Shaw said nationwide injunctions were terrible for democracy when it was a Biden policy on the chopping block. But now, apparently, nationwide injunctions are just fine. Senator Hawley asked him to state a clear legal principle about when these injunctions are appropriate and when they're not. And you know what? Shaw couldn't do it. He danced around the question, admitted his political views might color his perspective, and in the end couldn't articulate a real principle. This is exactly what's wrong with how the left views the law. They don't want consistent principles. They want whatever tool gets them the political result they want. And they'll cloak it in lofty language about protecting democracy or rule of law, but when pressed, they can't defend why the standard should be different depending on who's in the White House. Hawley laid out the history here. For 150 years, this country survived and thrived without single judges halting entire presidential agendas nationwide. Then the federal government grew, the left expanded the administrative state, and suddenly they decided judges should have this massive new power. And here's the kicker: they only want to exercise it when a conservative is in office. That's the dirty little secret they won't say out loud, but Hawley exposed it clear as day. Professor Shaw tried to hide behind the notion that judges have always issued remedies impacting nonpartisan. He even dragged in Marbury versus Madison, but as Hawley pointed out, nationwide injunctions as we know them today simply didn't exist until the mid-20th century. They are a new tool born out of the left's desire to control policy through unelected judges when they lose elections at the ballot box. Folks, this is dangerous. If one unelected judge can grind an entire presidential administration to a halt because they don't like the policy, that is not democracy. That is not the separation of powers. That is not the system the founders envisioned. And it sure as hell isn't constitutional. If the left wants to stop conservative policies, they should do it the American way: win elections, pass laws through Congress, persuade voters. But they know they can't. So instead, they run to friendly judges and get them to impose sweeping nationwide bans on policies they dislike. That is not justice. That is judicial activism. That is pure politics in black robes. So what do we do about it? We need senators like Josh Hawley and others to keep exposing this hypocrisy. We need courts to rein in these abuses of power. And we need Americans to wake up to understand that what's at stake here is the very future of how our democracy functions. Nationwide injunctions should be rare, limited, and based on clear constitutional principles, not the political whims of whichever judge happens to get the case. Otherwise, we don't have a system of law at all. We have a political tug-of-war where unelected judges pick winners and losers based on partisan preference. That's not what this country is about. We are a nation of laws, not of men. And if the left won't stand up for those principles, then it's up to us, patriotic Americans, to do it. Thanks for watching American Stronghold. If you want more truth, more fearless analysis, and more standing up for American values, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. We will not back down, and we will not be silenced. See you next time.